It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. But Craig, I want to start with you today. Yesterday was a historic moment for Maryland. We inaugurated a new governor, Wes Moore, who is the first African-American to serve in that position. And I think you would agree, both of you, that there's been an enormous amount of attention on Wes Moore since he was running for governor. There's just a lot of expectation about how successful he will be. And of course, there's always the noise about White House aspirations. Craig, what advice would you give Wes Moore in trying to manage and navigate this?
Well, it's no surprise that there's a lot of attention paid. He's a very attractive candidate. He was an attractive candidate. He is extremely articulate. He is historic in terms of the state of Maryland. I think he had an amazing campaign, winning, I think, almost 9 out of 10 votes. I think he's had a very strong transition as well. While a little slow, perhaps, with some of the nominees, he took his time. Probably, I think Al would agree, one of the most important things you have to get done in a short period of time is surround yourself with strong people to run the departments and agencies that are going to execute your programs. He understood that with the help of somebody with Eastern Shore roots, put together a great transition. So I think he gets high marks there. You know, there's an adage in Washington that go around that Lee Atwater, I attribute to him, but years ago, that you're either putting money into your political bank account or you're taking it out. And you know you're going to find times when you've got to take it out. So I think Wes Moore is building up a very strong political bank account, if you will, and there's nothing wrong with that. I watched him on the Sunday morning show, so CBS gave him network national news coverage. It was very personal. It was a very, I think a very solid interview. We got a chance to get to know him. People across the country got a chance to get to know him. So he's building that political capital. The question becomes, what do you do with it? I watched the entire inaugural ceremony yesterday. By happenstance, I turned on MPT, and there it was. It was one of the most moving inaugural events, frankly, that I have seen. Both the governor and the lieutenant governor gave outstanding speeches. I will say that perhaps the show was stolen a bit by the 3 daughters of the lieutenant governor who introduced her, who were delightful. But in Wes Moore's speech, he first thanked Larry Hogan and commended him for the work he had done over 8 years as governor, which in these times is nothing short of extraordinary, but it's also exemplary. And he concluded his speech by talking about working together. So he kind of concluded where he began with this outreach. In between, he talked about his own personal history. He talked about the historic moment, but he said this wasn't about history. This was about moving forward. That's what he was all about. He set some, I think, pretty important metrics about dealing with the economy and crime and employment and making Maryland a friendly place for business, using statistics, which he's going to be held to account for. But what he does now is what's important. And he will get a lot of attention. If he gets sucked into the vortex of national media, that'll be a problem. What he really needs to do is to deliver on the promises and begin working with this legislature. You know, he's got a lot of work ahead of him. And he's talking about setting up coalitions and working across the aisle in ways that perhaps we haven't seen. So he's got this work cut out for him. That's what he'll be judged on going forward. So I'd say very strong start. We'll see what comes, but he's made an impressive beginning in his first day as governor.
Well, Al, it is a remarkable moment, but it is also a challenge for somebody like Wes Moore. What's your advice?
Well, first of all, I want to concur with what Craig said on almost everything. I've actually walked over to the ceremony. It's about 2 blocks. It's about 2 blocks from my place. and lucky enough to get a seat for Wes Moore's speech. I thought it was a terrific speech. He laid out a very ambitious agenda for the state. And I think that's where we have to start. If Wes Moore wants to be president, the first thing he has to do is put those ambitions out of his mind and concentrate on being a good governor of Maryland. If he does a good job here, that's being a good governor is really the prerequisite for any governor running for president. So what does he need to do? I mean, he ought to focus entirely on being governor of Maryland. He ought to shape, and he sort of did that. And Craig talked about some of the reach out. You know, if you look at his biography, he's actually worked as interns in both political parties. He worked for Secretary Ridge, I believe, at Homeland Security. So he does know how to work across party lines. But I think he ought to, you know, articulate a clear political philosophy, demonstrate that he can enact a solid agenda, and at the same time, in his own state, build you know, that solid political and fundraising infrastructure that he would have to use if he went forward for national office. But most importantly, build trust in the voters of Maryland, because it's awfully hard to run for president if the people in your own state don't like you. So to me, the key for Wes Moore is patience. He's not going to be a candidate in 2024. And there's a lot more to running for president than being an attractive, charismatic candidate. Craig and I know that. It's very hard to run for president. And very few people, even though a lot of people think they're ready to do that, very few people can really do it. I do believe governors make the most formidable presidential candidates. The advantage they have is they actually have to govern. They have to deal with the problems that people have in their everyday lives, unlike members of Congress who can vote and raise money and stay in office. And the fact that they've governed does help them connect with voters as they're on the campaign trail. But think about this, Wes Moore has never governed. Today is his first full day in office, okay? He's probably still trying to find the bathrooms in the governor's mansion. So his first task is to learn the ropes of governing, to be a good governor, dealing with the concerns of Marylanders. And if I were advising him, I'd tell him to spend his first year and maybe even his first 2 years focused like a laser on Maryland. Then he can get involved in, there's some national organizations like the National Governors Conference. I remember Bill Clinton actually worked with George Bush on education through the National Governors Conference when he was governor of Arkansas, and other organizations to build a national profile and reputation. I think you ought to take a good look at Clinton's model. Clinton was a very attractive young governor when he was first elected, and you know what happened? He spent a lot of time in Washington. I was in the Carter White House then, and I saw him an awful lot. You know what happened? He lost his first reelection because he didn't pay enough attention to the state of Arkansas. Well, he learned from that. He went back. He defined a clear approach to governing. He became probably the nation's leading reform governor. And after 12 years as governor, they didn't have a 2-term limit in Arkansas. When he was the senior governor of the country, he ran for president. And when he ran, he knew what he wanted to do. He had built his agenda, and he also saw a clear path to the White House. So Wes Moore may someday be the president of the United States. I think it'd be great if he were. But to get there, for the foreseeable future, he's got to concentrate on being the best governor that Maryland's ever had.
Craig, I want to go back to one of our favorite subjects, is the House of Representatives. I think it was yesterday that Speaker McCarthy gave committee assignments to the Long Island Congressman George Santos, who has apparently fabricated almost every aspect of his life. It's been discovered. And it just seems incredible to me that the Republican Party would tolerate that, but certainly they have no hesitation in making him welcome in Washington.
Well, the George Santos saga can't get much more bizarre. We today have photographs of him allegedly as a drag queen in Brazil, which is not to cast aspersions on drag queens, but that's where the news is taking us. I think the only explanation is that this is a process that people in his congressional district elected him. You can't just tell those people that they were wrong. You have to go through a process. I cannot imagine him being in Congress by the time we get to the fall of this year, but that's really up to the leaders in Congress, and they're going through a process by which I think he will eventually resign. There is no standard in Washington that would suggest that he can hang on to this position, but Washington is a different place than what Al and I knew when we worked there. It just seems to get more embarrassing all the time, and I do think an end can be put to it soon, but I think it's going to take a while.
Al, I'm sure you have some thoughts on Mr. Santos.
Well, you know, when Craig and I were around, and certainly when I was on the Hill, the leaders of both parties would have never let him be seated. I mean, they just would not have done that. But this is a different world. And Kevin McCarthy seems to be in even a different world. He's sort of not in terms of personal characteristics, but in terms of trying to stretch the envelope for rationality. He's sort of the Donald Trump of the Congress. I mean, he just put Marjorie Taylor Greene on two committees, two important committees, Oversight and Homeland Security. This is a woman who was denied committee assignments, banished from committees in the last Congress for being racist and anti-Semitic and fomenting violence and doing just about every other thing that a QAnon conspiracy theorist could think about. You know, so he's moved to a new low, and his handling of George Santos is right in line with that. You know, the Republicans in Santos district want him to resign. As far as I can tell, the congressman, other Republican congressmen from Long Island want him out. And Kevin McCarthy thinks by putting him on committees that may not be the major committees, he's somehow disciplining him, I guess. But McCarthy will not say a bad, basically he just runs from that issue, says the voters elected him. I think McCarthy's making a mistake, but McCarthy seems to be a person who, if there's a hole and he's in it, he just gets that shovel out and keeps digging as hard as he can and as fast as he can. I'm with Craig. I don't think Santos is going to be in Congress very much. I mean, every day something comes up. Yesterday it was that he stole money from on a phony GoFundMe site that he set up for a dog who had a tumor owned by a disabled vet, and he stole the money. I think last night he had claimed that his mother was in 9/11, and the only problem is immigration records show she was in Brazil. But of course, we probably don't even know who his mother is because we don't even know his name. And because he's gone by so many. Anyway, it's a mess. He should not be in Congress. And if Kevin McCarthy really wants to be a national leader, he ought to take the lead in saying, we're not going to have this kind of person in the Republican conference.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.